Well, welcome everybody. My name's Trevor Foley. I'm the Director of Coaching Services at Linden Learning, and I'm joined by Tamsin Grimmer, the Director for Early Years at Linden Learning. And this came about because Tamsin and I were chatting. We were chatting and thinking about all the challenges that schools and settings had been coping with over the last couple of years, and then got to thinking about who it affected most. And it seems that those younger children at the beginning of their education are particularly vulnerable to all the disruption that's been going on. And so we thought about how could schools and settings work together in order to help them, to give them the best possible start. And so the topic of transition came up. And we started talking about just how important it is, Tamsin, didn't we, about that those moves between the different stages of education and how that really affects things.
Absolutely. And Trevor, you were able to draw upon, you've worked previously on quite a few projects in relation to transition.
I was in a very privileged position a number of years ago where I worked nationally, working on action research projects right across the country, where families of schools work together to try and get that one learning journey through a child's life to be as smooth and purposeful as possible. Yes, so we're hoping that I can bring some of the experience that I've had with that, and you've got your expertise and experience in early years, and some really practical insights into how schools and settings can work together, and see what comes out of us, maybe throwing a few questions about and exploring the topic. So I suppose the first question is, what makes transition important? Why would we bother caring?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it, Trevor? And I mean, from my perspective, it's always about the child, isn't it? So if we think about the child as being central to that, then we need to get the children to feel comfortable and happy and supported, so that it's as seamless as possible. But what about the importance of transition that you've found from your projects, Trevor?
Well, we looked at a number of different transition points, whether it be primary to secondary, but also whether it be first school to middle school or junior, or infant school to junior, etc.
Yes.
And in every single case, not surprisingly, the success of that stage of their education was enhanced wherever they were going to, built on what went before. And utilised all the skills and the growing responsibility that the children had been developing, where they felt, I suppose, more familiar. And that meant partnership, that meant working together in order to do that.
Yeah. So you mentioned before something about there being a dip in performance in the schools. So do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Every time that it seems to be that a cohort of children move from one setting to another, there's nationally a statistical dip, a slowdown in progress, and yet potentially it's a huge opportunity to accelerate it. One of the things that came across in the projects was how excited children were about the prospect often, as well as being slightly anxious and slightly nervous, this idea of stepping up. I spoke to one young man who was talking about how exciting it was the first time he put on a lab coat. He was going from year 7 and then suddenly felt, yes, he can do even more, and wanted to work in that area. So statistically, it seems to be a hurdle, but I think it can be a lever.
Yes. So, I mean, that makes sense to me, because we know that when children feel safe in their environment, then obviously they can thrive. So, if we can get that transition right, then it doesn't have to be a dip. It can actually be, as you say, an opportunity for children to, thrive. Absolutely. So, of course, we have added to this the current challenges. So, COVID has disrupted all of us in all aspects of education, and obviously it's even harder now for our youngest children because they haven't had the same level of experiences, and if you're saying that the best, most successful transitions are building on what's gone before, then obviously we've had some quite early disruption for these children, so it's going to be quite significant, the impact of this on them.
What have you noticed, Tamsin, just about that, where you've been working with colleagues working with those younger years?
Well, anecdotally, I've heard a lot of information about children who perhaps haven't had the same levels of socialization. So they haven't had the opportunities to play with friends. They haven't even been with extended family. So we've noticed that their communication and language is poorer as well. In fact, there was some research that's literally just come out from Ofsted that was talking about how the pandemic has impacted on children's development in all of those prime areas. So communication and language, particularly speech and language, personal, social and emotional development, and also for some children, even their physical development, particularly for babies. So it's been a difficult time for everyone, really.
It has, and of course, each of those things supports children working together, collaboratively learning as they go through the school. So there's this kind of layered impact, the kind of cumulative impact because of those early limitations or those early challenges.
Absolutely. So I guess it leaves us with the question of what's needed. What can we do about it?
Well, yeah, well, hopefully I'm looking forward to hearing about those practical things that can be done on the ground. One thing that I will say came across really strongly in the projects was that it was about partnership. It was about the adults who were supporting the children, seeing all the children as their responsibility, having that shared responsibility across the piece, and having a common goal, having a common vision for what those transitions can look like and what the partnership can look like. And it all seems to be built on trust. This, even though you've got settings and schools that will have different imperatives, slightly different priorities, ultimately the only priority is how can we support these children to be at their best, and hanging on to that and building your trust on that seems to be absolutely vital.
Absolutely. And if we can get that right and we can get those relationships in place and then focus on those three prime areas, I think that we'll be in a really strong starting position. So
what are we after then? If a transition goes really well and it's providing what we think is necessary to be provided, how are the children going to benefit?
Well, I think we'll see increased levels of confidence, independence. Hopefully there'll be children who feel valued and have a high sense of self-worth. We'll see children who develop personally, socially, and of course academically, so they'll make progress in their learning. So that's what we want. We don't want that dip in their learning. We want that continuation, and in fact we want, if possible, an acceleration, don't we? So
absolutely. And where children can experience that ability to improve, that sense that I am growing, I'm a developing person, then that kind of sets up the idea that that's what happens at every single stage. Almost becomes a habit of learning.
I like that. and I guess for parents and carers, we want them to feel that their child is supported, but we also want them to feel that they're working in partnership with the educators as well.
Absolutely, as co-educators. I mean, parents are the children will spend more time with the parents than they do at school, but they're learning every moment that they're awake.
Absolutely. And I don't think parents always know quite what a big impact they'll have on their children in that sense, because I mean, you and I know there's been lots of research over the years that's shown how vital parents are, and in fact parents are the single biggest indicator for success in GCSE level, for example. So
that's some superb work by Professor Charles DeForge on that, on the impact of even just conversations that happen at home, and the valuing of learning and growing and having a place where that's something that's considered significant. What about in terms of schools and settings where transition is most effective? What are they getting?
Well, I guess what we really want for our schools and settings is for them to be able to plan around the needs of the child. So we want them to engage with the children around transition in a meaningful way, so that it becomes seamless for our children. We also need our schools and settings to be working in partnership with those parents, because that goes both ways, doesn't it? So that they can encourage parents and support them in their role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One of one of the most powerful findings that we had, and there were 5 years of action research, 130 schools, over 2,000 children involved in this. It really was a privilege to be part of it. And one of the things we found where we returned to places and saw whether or not their planning for partnership had continued to have an impact was we saw that those that planned with building sustainability into their changes, and there seem to be different layers of that. So we've spoken a little bit about the sorts of outcomes, and obviously that would be based around the sorts of things that people did, the behaviours that they did, the kind of techniques and strategies. But underneath that was a system and a set of structures that supported it. There was a formalisation to it that was well resourced, that worked smoothly. But even having all those in place isn't going to make a big difference unless you've got colleagues that have the personal capability, the knowledge, the understanding and skills in order to make best use of those. However, the bedrock of it was people's attitudes and beliefs about both the transition, about their place within it. And the key attitude seems to be, this is something that's really worthwhile investing as a priority. And the key belief was that if we do work together, it's going to be successful. This is going to produce what we wanted to.
Yeah. And that's really interesting because that fits with I've done a lot of work around obviously adopting a loving pedagogy, and also recently around supporting children with self-regulation and growing self-regulation, and it all comes down to adopting that ethos and that approach, and so our attitudes and beliefs about the child and about what we want for children is vital, because that becomes the foundation that everything else is built upon. Of course, it's not enough on its own just to have, you know, a lovely vision and lovely ideals about what we want for children. It's everything else on top of that, but it's definitely the foundation. And then we can, you know, if we get that right, and focus on the child, then we can build upon that and hopefully make it, you know, much more successful.
Yeah, there's when I used to go into lots of the schools and work with them, sometimes it was very clear whether or not it was going to be successful or not. And there seemed to be a different sort of way of viewing things, where you had school leaders that saw children as things that kind of came along, stuck around for a little bit, contributed to my data, and then went off.
Yes.
Then
that conveyor belt.
Like a bit, like a conveyor belt. That the partnership didn't work. But where you had school leaders that viewed it in terms of the perspective of the child, or each individual child, that they had their journey that were going on, and there was home, and there was their early years settings, and there was primary school and secondary school, and there was their football club or their, you know, kind of extracurricular things, and this was all part of their journey, and they saw that they played a part in that, and their job was to ensure that they played the part of that journey for that child in the way that was going to be successful for that child. That's when the partnerships really worked.
Absolutely. So we want each child to feel that they are on this journey, but they have some ownership within it. We want them to feel significant, valued. We want them to know that they are capable and competent. We want them to feel safe. We want them to achieve. So, you know, we want this for the child. But what do we want for the parents, for example, or the leadership team? Or
I think in terms of the way that they approach, certainly the way parents approach it, that, as you said, they recognise that they are absolutely essential to this. And they can reinforce what's going on in learning, they can enhance it, they can be a key part of it. And if they work in partnership with the school, then the school will support them in being able to do it. And they can support the school in understanding their child to be able to provide what their child needs best as well.
Absolutely. And I guess then there's a responsibility on the school to work with parents and the children, but also to make sure that, you know, the experiences of the child and everyone involved, you know, bring out the best possible outcome for everyone. For the child.
So what do they need to know then? I mean, what's that level of understanding, the sorts of skills that are necessary? I mean, certainly in terms of the way that the knowledge understanding of the children would be to know how to form positive relationships, to be able to have the confidence and ability to lead their own learning within an environment that they feel comfortable with. Communication skills, so all sorts of things in there. What do you think?
Well, I think the key is relationships that you've just said. I think knowing the child really well is the the bedrock, really. So because then you can build successful relationships and give them that secure base that they need in order to thrive. And of course, if we know the children really well, then we can plan a really effective learning environment that give them opportunities to learn, that will engage and intrigue and excite the children, so that they will get the most out of the opportunity that they can.
There's a separate set of skills though, then, isn't there, that adults need in order. How do I work in partnership with other professionals and other adults that are supporting the child? And how do we get that collective intelligence? But if you could harness all of the knowledge, understanding, and kind of know-how into each experience of the child, because we were working together, and that's going to involve data transfer and meetings and kind of some systemization to it. That's that there. So in terms of your experience, what sort of things have made this easy systemically?
So on a practical note, simple things like obviously levels of sharing information, that's really important, but thinking about the child again, opportunities for the children to spend time in their new space. Yes. So for example, if children are moving from reception to Key Stage 1, can they spend time in year 1 and in the year 1 spaces? Think playground, lunch times, not just classroom. Perhaps the year 1 teacher can teach in the summer term in reception quite often. I think many schools do a wonderful moving up day or a moving up afternoon, which is fabulous. And I do think obviously we do need to do these things, but sometimes it's not enough. We need to do more. I think I've seen some lovely examples where the current year 1 pupils take the reception children on a tour of their classroom. They talk to them about their favourite spaces and places. I've seen examples of the children who need a little bit more support in reception being detectives and going into year 1 for extra visits, so that they can find out and be a class detective and then come back and feed back to the class the things they found out. I've seen things like working on projects together, year 1 and reception working together, so they have joint projects. Or I've seen the children, when they've moved up into year 1 on a visit, doing some sort of project that then is displayed, so that as soon as they arrive, their work is already there on the wall, and there's nothing says you belong like your picture on the wall.
Absolutely. And that kind of bringing that learning with you was something I saw in many of the transitions, where a student would, or people would bring a piece of work that they were really proud of. And then they'd have it there, and if it was a piece of writing, maybe it'd be stuck in the front of their English book in secondary school, where they've got that. And then the teacher would look at their work and be able to highlight what was effective and what was great about it, but also kind of to a certain extent held the child to account that everything you do from here is going to be at least this good.
Yes, that's true.
One of the things, thinking about that continuity of educational experiences, there were times when in October, say, the school would invite the previous teachers to where they were, and invite the children to now show whoever it was, show what you've done, show how you've progressed and improved. And if that was happening in October, you can guarantee that from the start the children are trying to produce their best, because they know they're going to share it with someone who's really significant, who's been there for that earlier part of their, and someone
who they love. Absolutely. And again, it's back to relationship. But interestingly, Trevor, talking of books, I've seen some brilliant practice where the books have moved with the children. So how every year in school we start with a new lot of books for our new cohort. Why do we do that? Firstly, it wastes paper, because often there's half a book left that hasn't been used, and it gets sent home with the parent, to the parent. But basically, if we keep the books, then the books just carry on, because we tend to have similar books. We might have a literacy book, we might have a maths book, we might have a topic book or something. If that book continues, then that is also something that's the same for the children, because I think it's for the children thinking about what is the same and what is different. And if we can keep as many factors the same as possible or similar, then it will help. And I've often thought about this for secondary as well, Trevor, although I know we're not really focusing on that today. But if only they would keep the same books from year to year, certainly in years 7, 8 and 9, I just think it would obviously help to save the planet a little bit, but it would also be continuity for those young people.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think of it a little bit like rock climbing, where you have all of that familiarity, almost feeling like that's a solid foothold or handhold, and because of that you've got one hand where you can really stretch and try those new things and explore things, knowing that you've got a firm foundation in order to do it with.
Absolutely.
So loads of strategies there and bits and pieces, and again, so much of it is based around partnership. It's based around adults being not only willing but capable of working in partnership in a meaningful way. Just like any other practical strategies that you've seen that you think people might find interesting?
So I've obviously seen people discuss the individual children, to a lot in depth, if you see what I mean. So not just handing on the usual transition stuff, but actually having meaningful conversations about the children, which is really important. But also, if, for example, the receiving teacher, maybe that's a year 1 teacher, is able to observe the reception children in their, where they're feeling safe and secure and confident, then they will see a better, more accurate picture of the child and what they can do, that they can then build on that in their new sort of classroom, if you like. I've seen, opportunities for sharing formative assessment. So whether that's through the early years foundation stage profile, or through learning diaries, or floor books, or working walls. Working walls. So information like that can also be shared with year 1 teachers. And in a similar vein to the book you talked about, I've also seen a floor book being shared, which were our kind of highlights from reception, and then that gets put in the book corner in year 1, and it becomes a really treasured resource that the children can go back and revisit at any time. And of course we know that revisiting learning is really important, because it helps children to think about learning and think about thinking and metacognition. It's an important way of building our self-regulation skills. So
wow, loads there, absolutely loads, isn't there? That there can be that sense of both the receiving school and the previous school or setting can identify ways of making that happen, and ways of building that into just the usual way. Of course, this is what happened there. One of the things that struck me when you were talking about that is the importance of those shared experiences. You talked about children working together and adults working together, meeting, getting people in the room together, so that there's that human connection as well. One of the most powerful moments in the whole of that research, I spent a lot of time talking to children, as you would do, and I remember talking to a small group and asking them about their experience of the process so far. They were in primary school still, but what was making their approach to transition the best, what was supporting them. And one girl said the thing that was made that she was so pleased with was whenever the man from the secondary school came and visited, it was clear that she was one of Mrs. Begum's friends, and if she likes him, I know it's going to be okay. So there's something about the children seeing the partnership as well.
Yes, I think that's lovely. That's so important, isn't it? Because our children trust us. Our children have that relationship with us, and we're needing to, allow them to move on, and we want them to be confident about that, and we need to be confident about that as well. And the more that we can instill that trust in other people, and tell them, all the lovely things they'll be doing, and show them that relationship we have with those other adults already, you're absolutely right. That's going to make a difference. So I have a couple more sort of practical hints.
Keep going, yes,
just before we finish. I think that the more that, for example, a year one class can build on some of the sort of EYFS practices, then the more continuity there'll be. So I've seen some great examples where there's been a lot of play-based learning using senses, building on the interests of children, continuous provision, indoor, outdoor learning, supporting the children in terms of their first-hand experiences in year one. So trying to sort of rather than trying to make reception a little bit more like year one at the end, it's pushed it into year one and trying to make year one a little bit more like reception, because again that really helps with that continuity. I've even seen schools where a teaching assistant or even the teacher will actually move with the children, and then they're on a rolling 2-year sort of cycle. I've seen joint projects that will begin in year one in reception, for example, and finish in begin in reception in the summer term and finish in the autumn term in year one. So it sort of becomes again something that's sort of continuous for the children. We've talked about sharing pictures and things, but there are other things like the processes we use in school. So if we use a system like hands on top, that means stop. If we use that sort of system in year one, let's introduce that in reception. Or if we're using a system in reception, clapping and clicking, then can we move that into year one? And it just helps with the continuity. So I think the other part that we sort of touched on but not really said is outside of the classroom. So the children have a lot more than just the learning to contend with. So they have lunch times, play times, where do we hang our coats, where do we go to the toilet, all of these other things which are really important to our children. And I think it takes us to see our classrooms and the school through the children's eyes, really, to try and organise things in such a way so that it won't be new, it will be much more similar, and perhaps we can introduce children to these things sort of over time, a bit more gradually, to support them with that.
Well, wow, first of all, and I've learned an absolute huge amount listening to you and just tapping into that experience that you have and that expertise in how can we provide a context where these children have the very best possible early experiences of education that are then going to pay dividends throughout every stage of their learning journey. And it also seems from listening to you that now is when schools and settings need to be starting to work together and to really focus on this, to be ready for this September, well, obviously the whole transition thing leading up to it and beyond, to ensure that, let's make this transition coming up the best yet for every family of schools that are working together that might have taken the time to benefit from the sorts of things that you've shared today.
Absolutely. So what would be your top tip, Trevor, just to finish with?
The absolute key is the adults to get together, to put this as a priority, put aside anything that they think might get in the way of it, such as a competition with another school or setting or about, and just say, actually, fundamentally, we are here for the children, and it's the same child all the way through their learning journey. So let's make the journey fit that child, and that involves dialogue and being in the same room.
Absolutely, that's brilliant.
What about you? What would your
my top tip would be, let's not worry about a catch-up curriculum. Let's worry about nurturing one. So let's focus on nurturing our children and build those loving relationships and provide that foundation upon which everything else can stand.
Well, Tamsin, thank you so much. I really benefited from this. I feel that I've got loads and loads that I can go out and look at and hopefully support others to be able to make the best of this. And so I hope everyone who's had the opportunity to come listen to this has taken something away that they can start to put into practice straight away. So thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure, Trevor. And if anyone wants to find out any more, then do visit our websites and get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.